Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Veronica Young. I'm a senior program manager on the network team at Code for America. I'm the point of contact for brigades west of the Mississippi, and we work to plan a lot of various initiatives along with the National Advisory Council and support the brigade network. So I'm really excited to have two of my colleagues at Code for America here with us today, Eleanor Davis and Francesca Costa, who both work on the social safety net team at Code for America. So hi, and thank you so much for joining us. So as you may know, the National Day of Civic Hacking Committee has been doing a ton of work in coordination with the National Advisory Council and the network team at Code for America to plan for this year's National Day of Civic Hacking. And we've been able to loop in members of the safety net team, including Eleanor and Francesca, who have been incredibly helpful in helping us get together our plans for this year's National Day of Civic Hacking. So just to provide a little bit of context, our theme this year is People Over Paperwork, Civic Action for a Stronger Safety Net. As many of you have been a part of, there's been a huge response to COVID from the network with really amazing projects coming forward. And a lot of those projects were in the social safety net space. And so the National Day of Civic Hacking Committee made a decision to essentially capitalize off of that energy and really continue our momentum to be able to create positive forces within our communities to react to COVID-19 and to continue our work in social safety net projects. And so we've done a lot of work the last few months working with the safety net team in order to identify ways that we can all take collective action on September 12th for this year's National Day of Civic Hacking. So we thought it would be a great kind of preview into our work for the day to get some information from Francesca and Eleanor about what is really going on in the safety net space at the moment, and what does that space look like in reaction to COVID-19? What is some of the work that the safety net team at Code for America has been doing? And then how can we leverage efforts that have been made throughout the network over the last few months into collective action on National Day of Civic Hacking, and we'll provide a little bit more information on logistics for the day, as I know that without the ability to have in-person events, the structure is somewhat new, and there may be some questions there. So if folks can please put any questions that they have into the Q&A function of the Zoom. It should be at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, and you can type a question. And that way we can answer questions really efficiently, and we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen. That means that I can't really follow along in the chat section, so we'll just take little breaks to look at Q&A as needed. And if you have any questions, make sure to put them in there, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'd love for Eleanor and Francesca, if you could start by introducing yourselves, and then we can get into the slide deck.
Sure, I can kick things off. So my name is Francesca Costa. I'm a senior program manager at Code for America on our Get CalFresh team. I'm joined by Eleanor.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I'm a senior program manager on our integrated benefits team.
And we're really excited to be with you all today. So Eleanor is going to start us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronica, for being the holder of the slide deck. Big job.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Awesome. And I think we can go to the next slide. And this is an introduction to the agenda. And then the next slide. Cool. So this is where Francesca and I are really going to kick things off by giving just sort of a pretty broad overview of sort of from where we sit at Code for America, working on CFA's safety net programs, sort of how we understand how COVID-19 has impacted the services that we work on. So before we do, I wanted to just ground the conversation a little bit in sort of Code for America's larger safety net goals and objectives. The goal of our safety net work really at Code for America is a human-centered safety net. And that's really the idea that when you're designing or changing systems or processes for the administration of safety net benefits, we should really deeply understand the experience of clients who use our services, and we should really design these systems with their needs driving our work. So we developed this blueprint for a human-centered safety net that really provides a framework of 5 principles that help us think about how we can shape and adapt safety net systems to better serve client needs. And this is just sort of a really helpful resource that we're, that we use when we're assessing or looking at safety net systems. And I think it's a really helpful resource to also use in times of crisis. And so just wanted to sort of highlight that, and you can learn more about it by going to the microsite. We developed the blueprint for a human-centered safety net to learn more about sort of how we apply this framework to our safety network. Next slide. Awesome, thank you. So in thinking broadly about how COVID-19 has impacted the social safety net, we really wanted to highlight sort of 3 large themes that we notice. The first one is just sort of like increased need across the board. We certainly saw this a lot in the management of Get Cal Fresh, which is the SNAP assister that we run at Code for America. Francesca's going to talk a lot about sort of what we saw there. But this demand has been really sort of unprecedented, certainly as far as we're concerned with Get Cal Fresh. We've never seen anything like this. And in many ways, it's pushed the services and agencies sort of to the edge of their capacity, and has definitely underscored for those of us who work on safety net systems just how intense and urgent the need is for the clients that we serve. The second theme is really around agility and creativity. So a lot of the response that states and agencies have taken on to respond to the need has involved rolling out brand new programs and services that didn't exist before to really meet this increased need. And we'll talk a little bit about one example, or I guess 2 examples of that, and sort of how the results have been mixed. But I think we've really seen kind of how agile these agencies can be in times of need. And the third theme that we want to highlight is really around inequity, that this pandemic has exacerbated existing disparities and has really, I think, forced a reckoning for us around sort of who is not served by the social safety net, and who is placed at even greater risk by this pandemic and its economic impacts, and has really made us think, really creatively about how we can meet our clients' needs in this moment. Next slide.
So next we're going to talk about SNAP. SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. At Code for America, we've put a lot of work into supporting the CalFresh system. CalFresh is what we call it in California, to basically streamline the application process for clients. So we function as a digital assister, using technology to connect folks to services, essentially. So just a little bit about how SNAP works. So SNAP is considered an entitlement program, and what that means is that folks are entitled to that benefit if they meet the guidelines that the federal government has set. So that money never runs out. There should never be a waiting list for SNAP, and it should never run out of funding. So that's just a little bit of context about why SNAP is so important in a moment of economic downturn. Essentially, we've seen people apply for SNAP in huge numbers, get approved, and the SNAP safety net is able to basically absorb everybody. So one of the main things to know about SNAP is that it works. It's really responsive in times of economic downturn, and actually works by bringing federal dollars into local communities, sort of priming the economy from the ground up. So SNAP has enrolled 6 million people. That was 3 months into the pandemic. There's an article from the New York Times if you want to read more about that. Despite this, we know that because of a lot of factors happening at the federal level, it hasn't been fully utilized. So one point of comparison could be the way that SNAP was used when the economy crashed in 2008. For example, at that time, the SNAP benefit allotments were raised across the board for folks. And so that's kind of one way that we can use this tool even better. But within these constraints, there was a lot of work that was done to serve people better. So I want to point out some stuff that's gone well and some stuff that hasn't gone well, which I think will be a really great foundation for folks as they start to dive into some safety net work. So for one, there were waivers that were available at the federal level. We'll talk about what was challenging about them, but what did work is that states were able to request waivers from the Food and Nutrition Services, so that's the USDA, to temporarily do away with the required interview for enrollment and to keep benefits, to pause harsh work requirements, and to implement telephonic signatures. In the slide deck, there's a link to a tweet from Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, announcing these changes. Additionally, states were able to apply to give all of their SNAP households the maximum allotment, which was really helpful for folks who might be receiving, on the lower end of the spectrum. One limitation of that is that the folks who were already at the lowest incomes did not see an increase. And then the transition to remote work. As Eleanor mentioned in the previous slide, we've seen people really have to be creative and kind of be forced to modernize systems that they may not have otherwise been able to do. We've been told by a lot of our partners in government that they were so surprised that they were able to go fully remote, that it was maybe something they'd been talking about for years, and that overall for staff morale, it's been really positive amid all of this crisis. So that said, of course, not everything has gone perfectly. So some challenges have been that SNAP offices have had to do more with less. They've had less staff, had fewer resources, and sometimes are relying on local economies for their administrative funding. So that's definitely something that the safety net is experiencing in this crisis. Again, the lowest income households have not received an increase in benefits, which is, makes for an uneven recovery for folks who may be out of work for months to come. And then applying for waivers ended up being pretty administratively burdensome for state agencies. A lot of back and forth and a lot of communication, as opposed to, for example, guidance from the federal government that, from now on, everybody's getting the max benefit and that's it. So some things that were made a bit more administratively challenging. And then the other thing to mention is that, while the federal government and the government programs that we work on are a really amazing tool to be able to serve a lot of people, and that's a big part of why we do the work that we do, there still are gaps in the safety net of who the safety net serves. And that's something important to pull out that will also be part of the actions that you all will be taking. We'll talk more about that. Next slide. So for those of you who know the work that we do really well, you've probably heard a lot about Get CalFresh. Again, Get CalFresh works as a digital assister. One of the things about Get CalFresh that's really interesting is that we are able to get in real time information from clients, whether that's in the form of data or in the form of their stories. So essentially, since California was pretty ahead of the curve, so to speak, in terms of basically shutting everything down when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we were the first to see the shelter-in-place orders and the first to see a shedding of jobs, essentially. So it was very, it was really painful. There were a lot of people reaching out in crisis, but we tried our best to basically reflect client stories back to the system to be able to make changes in real time. We'll talk more about that. So I want to talk a little bit about the themes that we saw from clients. This is really a select few. There were lots of themes. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of messages that we sorted. So theme number one is that people across myriad industries lost work overnight. The majority were first-time applicants, but a lot of people were already facing precarity. The way that I envision it is basically like in the spectrum of financial stability, it felt like everybody slid back. So people who were facing housing precarity became unhoused very quickly. People who were stable began facing precarity very quickly, and it was systemic. People were not ready to absorb this kind of impact. The acute need was made more urgent by dependents, whether that was taking care of family members or taking care of children. That really amplified the urgency of people's messages to us. Older adults and immunocompromised individuals were facing heightened anxiety about, being isolated from support, unable to go into lobbies even when they were open, unable to go to community-based organizations for food, really struggling to make ends meet and feeling really separated from resources. A lot of folks were attempting to enroll in multiple benefits, unsure of what they might be eligible to receive. A lot of comments about applying for as many programs as possible and really not knowing if any of them were going to come through. And as the pandemic has worn on, a lot of clients have told us that they've exhausted savings and support, and we've really started to hear a lot more from folks who had, stable incomes previous to the pandemic, but are really struggling now. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and read a few client quotes just so you all can get a sense. And there are probably at this point millions of them. I had 2 bartending jobs and both restaurants closed their doors because of the coronavirus. I used up all of my savings and I don't have money for food or rent. I applied for unemployment and I don't know if I will receive it, or if I do, how much I will receive. I'm very worried about being evicted. Next slide. I'm an hourly wage employee in the hair industry. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, my workplace has reduced my hours to 3.5 hours. I have $54 to my name at the moment, and I'm struggling to purchase food for my son and myself. And then the last one, due to COVID-19 virus, it's unsafe for me to go to work in the coffee shop inside the hospital. My father is elderly and needs my help, and I cannot expose him to the virus. I really need help because I can't afford my rent. Can't even afford my rent, much less now food. So I'll talk a little bit about how we used, basically client voices to advocate to the system in a bit, but I also wanted to ground you all in the data that we were seeing. So you'll notice this is not a chart that usually fluctuates this much. Generally, things stay around the levels that you see for November, December, January, and February. That's our typical application volume. And you'll see this peaked in a way that we had never seen. It was completely unprecedented. I think we peaked at about 7 times application volume. And you'll notice that in these, this light blue, if you can see this light blue, those are first-time applicants. So not only were people applying in droves, but a lot of folks had never applied before. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that among these same applicants, job loss in the previous 30 days, which is a question we ask on the application, went from an average of about 15% to about 50% of applications. So most people had just completely lost their incomes without any warning. Next slide. So another thing to point out is that one thing that we found is that we were really seeing more of the crushing volume than the rest of the system because we were available and accessible online. And we've noticed that during the pandemic, again, systems have been forced to modernize, and remote access, internet access to public benefits has become a crucial way to access these critical resources because people simply have not been able to go to lobbies, systems have been closed, phone lines have been jammed up. So if you'll see this light blue on the bottom, I hope people can see this color distinction here. These are Get CalFresh applications, while the whole bar together is all applications. So you'll see like the darker blue stays relatively stagnant with a slight increase in April, but the Get CalFresh volume really does increase quite a bit. And then, so just to kind of, again, let you in on kind of how we've been able to use this information to leverage systems change. So, first we synthesized thousands and thousands of comments manually. Our researchers were working around the clock to learn from clients themselves what they were experiencing. Often our researchers are out in the field talking to people, asking them questions. We really had to flip everything that we did on its head and reach out, synthesize all of the comments that were coming into our systems. This has really taught us a lot about how we can do research without asking for folks' time, really taking the time to read through the comments that they're sharing with us in their applications. In number 1, I hyperlinked a blog post from our research team that you can check out. Number 2 is elevating the trends and the urgency to our state and agency partners. Again, we were sort of a canary in the coal mine. A lot of people did not realize what this was going to mean for folks. So our team worked to inform partners and also media about the scale of the crisis. One example that we felt really happy to be able to contribute to was that the state was able to give out guidance to all of the county administrators about how to basically implement and absorb all the folks that were losing their jobs, how to be able to ask for their income and what documents they didn't need to provide to try to make the process easier for them. The third thing is we made changes to our product. We researched where people were getting stuck. We talked to our client support team, learned what challenges people were facing and writing in about. A lot of people were writing in about not knowing how to represent recently lost income. So we made some changes to our application flow that frankly we should have made before, but we didn't have insight into before the pandemic. And then number 4, bringing those things that we've learned to other opportunities. Eleanor and I are going to talk about some other pandemic-related response projects that we've been running here at Code for America to basically try to meet people's needs from more than just the traditional safety net programs.
Awesome, thanks, Francesca. So the second theme that we wanted to highlight is really the degree to which the pandemic has forced states to pivot really dramatically to meet increased need. And in many cases, this has looked like designing and launching entirely new benefit programs that didn't exist before the pandemic. And one such program that we wanted to highlight because we've worked really closely on in several states is Pandemic EBT, or PEBT for short, which is a brand new school meal replacement benefit delivered to families whose children qualify for free or reduced priced school meals. So over 30 million children across the country get free or reduced price meals at school through the National School Meals Program. And when the pandemic first swept through in about March and sort of schools shut down basically across the country almost simultaneously, all of those children were no longer getting fed at school. And really that there was this sort of like heightened risk of child malnutrition, child hunger really going up. And you see that it's really not an insignificant amount of money or resources for these kids and these families. This quote on the side says, "My job that I worked part-time is closed due to coronavirus. My kids are home from school and I have no daycare for them. They are on the school lunch program, and that is a financial issue to provide what they need at this time." So while the average, I think it's about, $5.70 a day, sort of on average for these meals, it's a huge benefit to families, and families across the country really rely on their kids being fed at schools, and suddenly that wasn't available anymore for millions of families. So the idea of Pandemic EBT was pretty simple. It was just sort of we can provide families with the equivalent of the cost of those meals by just sending them, money on an EBT card, the same kind of card that people who are on SNAP get with their benefit on it. So it sounds really simple, but the idea, the reality was really quite a bit more complicated. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of like what was so complicated about it, but essentially there really was no existing mechanism to deliver that benefit to these children. This required an entirely new benefits infrastructure that in most states didn't exist before. And so states across the country had to build basically a brand new benefit system from scratch over the course of just a couple months, which is a pretty incredible feat when you think about how sort of labor intensive these benefit systems are to maintain for all states. At this point where we are now, over 70% of states have delivered benefits to families in their state via PEBT. Which is kind of a minor miracle when you think about just sort of like all of the challenges, and the timeline that they were working off of. And so, I think it's important to highlight, we don't always think of massive state agencies being sort of like agile and responsive, but they all really moved mountains so quickly to be able to launch this program. Next slide, please. So while, it was such an impressive feat to get this program off the ground, there were a lot of challenges to getting it off the ground, and many states had sort of immense barriers in place to doing this. Just really quickly want to share sort of how we synthesized what we saw as the top 5 challenges. We worked really closely with about 10 states, both launching an independent application for PEBT, as well as just sort of consulting and problem solving with states. So we got a pretty good look at what was going on with this program, and this is really what we sort of saw were the top 5 challenges. The first one, identifying eligible children, really sort of the most basic part of this program, and something that states struggled with really kind of across the board. They struggled with even the basic question of how do we identify all the kids who are eligible for this new benefit, right? They were given really unclear and sometimes changing guidance from USDA on how to implement eligibility. So for instance, in some states, they were able to look at the cases for the programs that they run, so SNAP and Medicaid, and say, okay, well, if a family is qualified for SNAP, they automatically qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So that means we can just look at all of our SNAP caseload and look at all of those families and see if they have children who are school aged, and then just give them the benefit. But this wasn't consistent across states. And so they had to sort of monitor, share other state plans to really learn how they might approve people and how they might confer eligibility for the program. It really was not clear, unfortunately. The second one, data sharing. So again, they really needed to look at all of the kids in the state who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch in order to give them the benefit. And most states didn't have a central repository of all of these kids. And so they really had no just sort of like one list of who was eligible for PEBT. So they had to sort of manually collect that data from individual school districts, which is where that data lives. But data transferring between school districts to the social services agency, which is who was administering the benefit, was basically unprecedented in most states. They'd never done this. And so that was really challenging. Additionally, every school district, of course, like collects and manages different data in different ways. And so there was like very little consistency, which made it really complicated to collect and transfer that data into sort of one centralized system. So this required an immense amount of collaboration between multiple agencies and was just a really real logistical hurdle for most states to do. The third one, vendor relationships. States were navigating really complex contractual relationships with a really small pool of vendors whose active participation was needed to launch this program. There are basically 2 EBT vendors in the country, FIS and Conduent, and they, every one of the 50 states basically has a contract with one of them. And depending on the contract that your state has negotiated with the EBT vendor, you either had like some flexibility to have them help you launch your PEBT program, or you really didn't have any at all. And oftentimes we had EBT vendors charging really immense fees for implementation because this program was out of scope from the base contract that they had negotiated. And remember, PEBT, it's right there in the name. It was required to be delivered on EBT cards. So there was really zero flexibility for states to innovate or to go to a different vendor or use a different system to deliver these benefits. So that was a real challenge, trying to negotiate sort of the whole EBT system. Data matching and validation. So most states encountered immense issues when working with their existing data to implement PEBT. So once they identified all of the students in the state that received free or reduced price lunch, if they did, they had to deal with the accuracy and the integrity of that data, which often wasn't great. They had to identify duplicate student records across schools, kids who had changed schools and had records in different schools. They had to group those students into households by identifying siblings and head of households in the data, which was really hard. They had to identify the most up-to-date mailing address for each student, which was almost impossible given that most schools basically collect information from students once at the beginning of the school year. There's no mechanism to change that information usually if you move, and compounded by the fact that the pandemic really heightened uncertainty and instability for so many families. So it was really sort of unrealistic to think that school districts would have sort of accurate, up-to-date mailing information for every student, but that's what states had to work with. And they had to match student data across data sets, which required really delicate data work that many states really didn't have the time or the in-house expertise to do. So we actually spent a lot of time working very closely with several states to help them with their data matching algorithms so that they could sort of validate the kids that they had without denying kids unnecessarily because they couldn't find them in a database. And last, public outreach. So even after you do all of these things and you solve all of these challenges, you still need to let everyone know who's likely eligible for this program what it is so that they're prepared to receive it and use it. States had to let families know that the benefit was coming so that they didn't, get that envelope in the mail and toss it out, not knowing that there was money on a card for them. They had to let them know what the money was for, how to use it. And they really had to confirm that the money was coming from the state so that the families trusted that they could use it. There were a lot of trust issues. Unfortunately, there were a lot of sort of scams in several states where just misinformation was being sent to clients. It was really, really unfortunate. So it was a whole separate effort to let families know how to get this benefit and how to use it. Next slide. So those were all the challenges with PEBT. Where is it now? So currently, the PEBT program is actually set to expire at the end of September. So states have to issue all of their benefits and close their books before then. So currently, human services agencies across the country are beginning to sort of phase out the program. But concurrently, we're seeing news stories every day about schools who have reopened in person needing to shut back down. We have yet to control control the pandemic as a country. And we're really seeing how uneven school openings have been, and it's making us realize just how uncertain the future of in-person schooling is really across the country. And so, with that, kind of watching school openings, watching them shut back down, really the question of a possible extension of the PEBT program is really looming large. And it's been a big point of discussion and debate in Congress about including a formal PEBT extension in the next coronavirus response bill. And so really the question that we've been asking ourselves a lot at CFA, and that a lot of other advocacy groups are asking themselves, is if schools are forced to close down again in the fall and we need to use PEBT again, how can we set states up for success so that they're ready to restart the program and we don't just repeat the challenges that we saw for the first time? So how could PEBT sort of work more smoothly if we need to jumpstart it? This is something, again, that we're doing a lot of thinking and writing about, and there will also be an option to do some thinking with us on this particular question as part of the National Day actions this year. Next slide, and back to Francesca.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. So just to kind of cover a couple of points that I think we've made throughout the presentation, but really just want to make sure folks are taking away from today as they prepare to do their actions for National Day. Essential workers have really been unable to stay home and are at an increased risk. Millions of low-income workers have had to choose between between their safety and their livelihoods. For a lot of folks, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, we talked about how coronavirus doesn't discriminate, and really we found that it does. It has really exploited all of the fault lines that exist in our safety net and just made it extremely clear that we need to prioritize these inequities before we're able to make lasting change and really meet folks' needs. A lot of folks, as we mentioned earlier, don't qualify for federal safety net programs because of their immigration status, because of asset tests, work requirements. And without a safety net, staying home is harder, which we've seen some local research here in San Francisco that showed that a lot of folks who were taking public transportation still had to go into their jobs, may not have had any safety net to fall back on, and if they got a positive coronavirus test, had no way to feed their families, which really makes it hard for our whole society to bounce back from this kind of an event. As you may have gathered throughout the presentation, high application volumes really stressed antiquated and underfunded enrollment systems. In California, just given the Get CalFresh work, we've seen that it's been really different in different counties based on how many resources they have, how much their board of supervisors is willing to fund their programming, et cetera. And then one thing that's really remarkable about the United States is that a lot of our health insurance comes from our jobs. And so amid a pandemic, a lot of folks lost their health insurance because they lost their work. So again, through Get CalFresh, we saw that recent job loss went from an average of 15% to 50%. And that's just in the previous 30 days. So not capturing folks who, maybe lost their job 2 months ago and are finally applying for benefits because they are coming to terms with the fact that they're not going to be able to bounce back as quickly as they hoped. And these categories, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. We don't have enough time to really cover all of the ways that COVID has exploited these divisions, but this is some information that we hope will set you up in terms of next steps thinking. Next slide. So because of all of the, the fault lines and the safety net that we mentioned, another program that we decided to take on at Code for America is the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants program. We call this DRE. This was a collaboration between the California Department of Social Services, 12 contracted community-based organizations or CBOs, and Code for America, as well as a banking institution called Blackhawk, to basically administer a synthesis of philanthropic and public funding, $75 million to 150,000 undocumented individuals who had documented impact from COVID-19. Each individual received one $500 bank card. I'm very excited because as of last Friday, we distributed our last bank card to the last person. It's shockingly difficult to administer exactly 150,000 cards, no more or less. So I wanted to share a couple of key learnings with you all, and this is just kind of like a little bit of the behind the scenes. We've actually never talked about the program publicly yet, so this is really exciting to share with you all. So, 3 things that are big takeaways for us. One is that folks who are undocumented are facing unprecedented need without a safety net, have really been systemically excluded from all pandemic response. And so that was really one of the key reasons that California decided to take this on, knowing that, until the most vulnerable in our communities are able to successfully stay home or feed their families, that we're, none of us are really going to be able to recover from this. Fear and anxiety from rapid job loss are heightened because of existing federal threats. If folks are not familiar, public charge is an immigration term. Basically means that the federal government would determine that folks can't be self-sufficient and could therefore be denied a green card. There's been a lot of work at the federal level to try to make this a bigger thing for folks. And that's kind of the context that this landed in. So this pandemic has really hit amid a larger federal context of restrictions for immigrants needing additional support. And that was something that came up in this program as well. A lot of fear about that, even though it was not a public charge program. And then last, this shouldn't be a news break for anybody, but clear information and client-centered access points are critical for a good client experience. This is something we saw again through this project and are looking to learn from it going forward. So I'll just jump into a few client quotes. And really, just before I read these, these are hard client quotes, like as were the last group. But I think it's really important to just recognize the severity of the need, and it's very quiet. Like it's something that a lot of folks haven't talked about, again, because of this climate of fear. So the first one is, my name is, and we redacted information. My name is blank, date of birth blank, telephone number blank. I sleep on a bench at the intersection of blank street and blank street. I need help. I don't have anywhere to live, and I don't have money for food. The second is, my name is blank, and due to COVID-19, my husband lost his job and at the moment can't find a new one. I have also been affected because I have 4 children at home and I don't have work and we couldn't fully pay rent this month. Next slide. Good evening, I seek your goodwill. I was interviewed for help. I'm 68 years old and without a job because the farmer's market is closed. Please, I need the help. My application number is blank. The assister said they would call me at my telephone number. Please don't leave me without this help. God bless you, thank you. And then the last one, in the name of my family, I want to thank you for your support and valiant collaboration. Today, I received my card from Cheerla, which is one of our partner organizations. Thanks as well to your whole team that helped us, and God bless all of you. We really saw that clients were really patient with us as we spun up this new system. As Eleanor mentioned, it was not without any hiccups, but folks really were grateful for the assistance that we received. And so, with all that, wanted to just think through how we're going to work together as a large network focused on making sure the safety net can best serve all of us. Number one, continue to invest in and hold up the social safety net. While it's far from perfect, it is the only system designed to respond to this magnitude of a crisis. One of the reasons that I really appreciate working at Code for America is because we really look for the biggest levers and see how we can leverage them to better serve the most vulnerable among us. Number two, work in coalition with government partners and community-based organizations to meet unprecedented and persistent need, while recognizing that the pandemic has had disparate impacts on different populations. That's one of the reasons that we involved an exercise that we'll talk about for National Day in a little bit. We involved work with community-based organizations and local resources because we recognize that this moment really does require us to dig deeper and really collaborate across the board because there is so much persistent need. And then last, as Eleanor mentioned with PEBT, thinking through how we can make this better next time, continue to think creatively about how to improve services while preparing to capitalize on opportunities to serve people better through the pandemic. And with that, I believe we're going to kick it back over to Veronica. Oh no, I'm sorry, one more slide. So I know that this is probably a lot of information for you all, and if you haven't really dived into Safety Network before, I would imagine that you might be feeling a tiny bit overwhelmed by all this information. So we really wanted to include some reading suggestions. These are things that we've been sharing internally on our Slack channels. Some of this stuff is kind of like an overview, some of it's really deep. Some of it is from our partners at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Some of it was written by our own staff. Or our government partners, or our partners in civic tech. So I hope that you enjoyed them. And I believe we'll be able to share out this. I think somebody wrote in about the hyperlink, so we can share out the slide deck.
Awesome, that was really fantastic. Thank you so much, Eleanor and Francesca. I am going to look into our Q&A box here and see what questions that we had. let's see, I will start from the beginning. So Renee says applicants are often confused by the precise language used on applications. One example from my personal experience as a SNAP recipient and advocate for others in Florida is the "do you pay for heating or cooling costs" question. Most households should answer yes unless electricity is included in the cost of rent. Many think it's asking if they receive a bill separate from their usual electricity bill, so they answer no instead and lose out on a huge deduction, often find themselves ineligible because of it, when instead they should be eligible or receive more than they were approved for. Is this an issue CFA's safety net team has encountered?
I can start this off. I would say that's a huge part of our work. We've positioned ourselves on Get CalFresh specifically as a digital sister, which essentially gives us leeway to talk about things the way that a community-based organization, a sister, supporting somebody through the application process would, which means putting words in a way that people would use them and understand them. We do a lot of usability testing to understand and really ask clients, like, what does this mean to you? Would you say yes or would you say no? Like, tell me about your situation, to try to really drill down into, to your point, Renee, what this really means for folks. In California, people actually automatically get the standard utility allotment. So it isn't something we've had to dive into specifically. We have asked folks to check from a list all of the potential utilities that they pay for. But I think that this really is the bulk of our work, is translating these systems that are not really designed to be clear to make it as easy as possible for folks to be able to get through the application process and get benefits. Not sure if you have anything to add, Eleanor.
No, that was a great answer. I would just say, yeah, that's absolutely something that we also include sort of as one of our principles of a human-centered safety net, right? Is like using plain language that people understand and making it really simple, so that it's easy, not difficult to answer really simple questions.
Yeah, and one of the actions that we're going to talk about shortly is really going to put you in a position where you can kind of make comments about the language that you see as well.
Great, thank you. There are a few questions here around accessing hyperlinks and making the slide deck available. So yes, we will make the slide deck available. What we'll do is we'll put the recording of this video as well as the slide deck into a discourse post and post that in the Brigade's Slack channel. And you can also find that on discourse. So that should be up in the next day or two, and we'll make an announcement when it's up through the Slack channel. Okay, so I answered that one. So the hyperlinks will be available through that. Gregory asks, how can we get this product in our state via Our Brigade? And Gregory is with Code for South Florida.
I think that one came in while we were talking about PEBT, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting. Yes, maybe Gregory can add in the chat what product you are referring to. PEBT wasn't a product, so maybe it was Get CalFresh? Well, tell us more, Gregory. We'd love to answer your question.
Cool. While we're waiting for Gregory's response, I'll go to another question. Renee asked, have you encountered any conflicts between waivers and existing programs? For example, we normally qualify for free lunch as SNAP recipients. We're currently ineligible for SNAP and free lunch due to now expired federal unemployment benefit bonus. We have to wait for our income to go back down below thresholds to reapply.
Yes, Renee, another excellent question. And yes, I think that the response could have been more coordinated in a lot of ways. The unemployment bonus definitely put people well over the income limit, and that was really challenging. We actually saw a surge in denials due to being over income during the pandemic, and kind of like what we've been able to glean from the data and from what we're hearing from clients is that, again, folks were really just trying to figure out what they might qualify for, apply for as many things as possible, because they had absolutely, nothing. The rug had been pulled out from under them, but then got unemployment and then were ineligible for CalFresh or for SNAP. So that was really challenging. We've been trying to message stuff as clearly as possible. We put up a pandemic Q&A section of Get CalFresh, which was, really just trying to support folks in answering the questions that they were coming into through our live chat feature. But yes, absolutely. You know, in a perfect world, there would be more coordination, and exempting certain kinds of income related to the pandemic would be really helpful at a policy level. We were really kind of operating within those constraints. Although the stimulus check was exempt because it was just a one-time payment for all SNAP recipients.
Cool. Looks like we got some clarity on Gregory's question. He was asking about Get CalFresh. So how can brigades get a version of Get CalFresh in their states, or create one for their state?
Yeah, I would say, I think I messaged him directly, but yeah, I would just say we sometimes get requests or questions from states who are interested in the product that we developed, Get CalFresh, and sort of how it could be applied in other states. I think it's a larger question. We have a lot of ways that we can partner with states to really sort of look at their existing systems, assess what's going on, where the strengths and challenges are, and then how can we iterate and improve on what they're doing. So, you know, maybe a product like a CalFresh isn't even needed. Maybe there are other ways that we can sort of optimize or serve people better. So we'd love to talk more about that if that's something you're curious about.
Cool. And then another question from Gregory: how did you do outreach to ensure eligible people use your tool, Get CalFresh or PEBT?
I can start with Get CalFresh, and then Eleanor can jump in with PEBT. So for Get CalFresh, we don't tailor our to only eligible or potentially eligible individuals. We essentially start the flow with a pre-screen. So we really try to value folks' time and help them figure out if they might qualify ahead of starting them with the application process. So we have folks answer questions, give them, give detailed information about their income, and then, kind of assuming that they are likely eligible, then we have them give us their personal identifying information. So it's kind of like a screening up front, and then we do the like name, address, and all that stuff like that, which I think works pretty well.
Yeah, outreach for PEBT, every state handled it differently. What we did in the states that we worked with is we actually built an outreach digital toolkit for a lot of states that really sort of built off of a lot of the work that we've done building out just sort of best practices for digital outreach generally. For PEBT, I think the tricky thing around outreach was like, who's the trusted messenger that we really feel like needs to let people know about this new program. I think Francesca talked a lot about why certain populations might have some distrust of sort of working with the Human Services Agency. The population that was eligible for PEBT was also a population that overlapped with people that weren't eligible for other types of social safety net benefits. And so I think that what we ended up doing and really recommending for states was going through the school districts. And so we developed basically sort of an outreach script that could be an email body, a text body, a call script, and basically sent out instructions to the school districts to reach out to the students via whatever method they have. Some school districts in California do text, some don't. So we basically said, however whatever your communication channels are with families, please use them to let them know about this benefit.
Great. And then Gregory asks one more question. For Get Your Refund, we use coalitions in Florida as a way to do outreach to get more CBOs reaching the right people. Is this something you did with Get CalFresh or PEBT? What are the pros and cons of this type of method from your view?
That's a great question. I can start, and I'm sure maybe Eleanor will have more to add. So I would say the foundation of Get CalFresh actually started by working with our community-based organization, Community, which is actually where I worked when Get CalFresh started. So there was a lot of feedback and input that came from the community-based organization, Community. We are very client-centered at Code for America, so really we wanted to make sure that our systems were working for clients that needed to access services. So we really have focused our decisions on clients rather than other organizations working to connect folks to CalFresh. But we are actually diving in these next couple of months to seeing how we can better serve the community-based organization community, knowing that folks are often serving people that we might not reach through digital ads, for example. Maybe folks who aren't as comfortable with technology or wouldn't go to Google to figure out how to apply to start. The other thing I can share is that for the DRE project, we did actually work exclusively with community-based organizations. And we've been having some conversations with our Get Your Refund team about that model. I think at Code for America, we're always trying to learn how the best way is to support folks. And so we're kind of continuing to involve in that.
Great. Okay, we have two more, looks like, quick questions, and then we can move on to how we transition this energy into the National Day of Civic Hacking that's also building off of the enormous energy from the network in social safety net and COVID response. So David asked what coding languages are required to be proficient to work with CFA. David, I'll answer that question more broadly for brigades. Brigade projects have several different functions and several different needs per project based off of what the needs are for that specific project. And there are lots of roles within a brigade that don't actually require certain coding languages and that are non-technical, as we discussed a little bit in this presentation. A lot of brigades do a lot of user research and have partnership needs. And so you can be a non-technical person and still engage. And then various projects have various different coding languages. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your local brigade in order to find out more information about what projects are currently ongoing and how you might be able to assist. We also have brigade project stand-ups on Mondays, and you can find more information in the brigade Slack channel about when these are occurring, and we're going to start putting out needs for various projects across the network during those project stand-ups, given that everybody is virtual right now and there are different needs in different places. It makes sense to kind of open up some of the work more broadly so that you don't have to be in a very specific location just to be able to contribute. So I'd encourage you to attend those stand-ups to learn more about various projects and what those needs are. And then Mary asked one question for homeschooled children, are they qualified? I imagine that question is around PEBT.
Yeah, sounds like PEBT. So homeschool children, I mean, so the PEBT eligibility was based on free and reduced price lunch at school. So when schools first closed, what they were looking at to determine PEBT eligibility was the student enrolled in free and reduced price lunch, in the free and reduced price lunch program at their school at the time that schools had closed. So had they actually like filled out that National School Lunch Program application. So if they were homeschooled, my guess is that they probably hadn't filled out that application. They weren't receiving those lunches. I think as the program went on PEBT, some states did varying things around pulling in kids that were newly eligible. So if you hadn't been receiving free and reduced price lunch before schools closed, but then, head of household lost their job and then suddenly you do qualify, can we sort of go back in and make you newly eligible to deliver you PEBT benefits, and sort of maybe students who weren't actually receiving the benefits but were eligible for it. So that really varies state to state. I would say, Mary, you can definitely do a little bit of research about sort of how the program was structured in your state. Again, I think there was not as much consistency and guidance across states as we would have liked, which means that programs really sort of differed state to state in how they rolled this out.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, great. We have no open questions at the moment, so I will use now to continue in our slide deck and transition into talking about National Day of Civic Hacking. So let me get that up. Okay, great. Hopefully you can see my screen and you can also hear me. So National Day of Civic Hacking is coming up on September 12th. As we discussed a little bit earlier, this is a new year in which we are all remote. So the logistics of how the day will operate has changed a little bit from last year. So wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how those logistics works. So as brigade leaders and as folks planning essentially to have your brigade participate in National Day of Civic Hacking, you can know kind of what to expect and how things will work. So the National Day of Civic Hacking Committee put a lot of thoughtful work into thinking about how do we help people engage in National Day of Civic Hacking without putting a ton of burden on brigade leaders to essentially organize a virtual event. As we all know, event planning takes a lot of time and energy and work, and planning an in-person event is a feat in and of itself. And now having to switch over to virtual, it can be kind of a scary process. And we know that a lot of folks have limited capacity at the moment, just due to the new environments that we all find ourselves in. So the committee was really focused on being able to put on a day in which folks could very easily participate and where brigade leaders could essentially direct their members to a collective actions and a collective event without having to do a ton of work themselves to organize an event. With that being said, we do also strongly encourage brigades who do have the capacity to do a little bit more planning to work with local partners in the safety net space. And there are tools in the National Day of Civic Hacking Toolkit about how to reach out for partnerships. But here we'll be showing kind of what schedule is going to be essentially provided during the day. So essentially we're going to have everybody together, which is really exciting. In the past, we haven't had necessarily one time where folks are able to join in together. And so we're really excited to be starting off National Day of Civic Hacking on September 12th together. So we'll start at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll start with a kickoff event. And this will be a panel discussion hosted by Code for America. So we will have folks from Code for America who will be on the panel, as well as a couple guests from other partner organizations that we work with in the safety net space. And we'll be leading a panel discussion about the response to COVID-19 and in particular the safety net space. And then we have three main actions that we're going to be engaging in on National Day of Civic Hacking. Eleanor and Francesca will talk about this a little bit more in a little bit. But for those three actions, we're going to have three essentially breakout Zooms that will run all day, where for the first hour from 10 a.m. Pacific to 11 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern, folks can gather and essentially figure out who exactly is going to be working on what. So for example, one of the actions we're going to be taking is doing a design audit of programs in your state that folks apply for, like SNAP. And then we're also going to prioritize looking at unemployment insurance websites, as well as a couple of other different programs, and looking at those websites and essentially seeing how user-friendly are they, finding out where there may be some pain points. And this is a really great exercise. So the safety net team at Code for America developed what's called a 50-state assessment of the various services online. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add these design audits by state to that 50-state assessment. But we essentially have to break out who is going to take what state, who is going to take what service. And so really this 10 a.m. Pacific to 11 a.m. Pacific time is going to be where we talk through those actions, give a little bit more details on how to perform the actions, and then break up who is going to be taking what actions by location, etc. And then at 11 a.m. Pacific is going to be the working time. So if your brigade is hosting your own Zoom, and Code for America will provide Zoom rooms for each brigade brigade that needs one. This is going to be the time where you can get together as a brigade and start working on the 3 collective actions, in addition to doing any additional programming that your brigade wants to do for the day. We'll all check back in around 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, just to see how folks are doing. This will be where we check back in within the breakouts by action. So like I mentioned, we'll have 3 Zoom rooms running all day, and each of those Zoom rooms will be one of the actions we're all taking. So we'll do a check-in, and then we will continue working and close around 3 p.m. Pacific. So that's the schedule for the day. This is just a little bit about the kickoff panel, and you can read more about that here as well as in the toolkit. So we'll have keynote speakers and a panel discussion. Our newer CEO, Amanda, will be joining us for that kickoff, so really excited about that. And we're going to discuss topics such as the power of collective action, the current state of the social safety net, and in particular response to COVID. And then, like I mentioned, we'll have the 3 actions taking place and the 3 breakout rooms. So these are the 3 actions we'll be taking, which is completing the design audit of your benefits application, building a local asset map to support and empower your community. So one of the projects that we saw coming out of our local brigades a lot throughout COVID response were asset maps in various areas for folks to be able to find resources. A lot of these asset maps centered around being able to find food and then other resources during the pandemic. So we have essentially a project canvas created out of North Carolina of their asset map tool, and folks can use either this project canvas or the expertise from other brigades who have created asset maps to be able to create an asset map for your community. And then the last action is generating insights around COVID response problem statements. So like I mentioned, we'll have a breakout room for each breakout Zoom for each action, and we will be able to decide logistics from there, as well as talk about the specific needs for each of those actions and be able to provide support. And then during working time, we encourage brigades to host your own Zooms if you have capacity to do so. But if not, that's fine too. Folks can still stay in the collective action rooms. And we encourage you to engage with local community partners if you're able to work on local needs during National Day of Civic Hacking also. So how do the Zooms work? I know this is kind of a very necessary logistical question. So there will be one big Zoom for the kickoff event. And please remember that when you post your meetup event, you should be directing folks to register on the National Day of Civic Hacking website because everyone will need to register in order to be able to access that big Zoom room. And then we'll move to 3 large Zoom rooms that are broken out by action. Those will last all day. And then there will be smaller Zooms for brigades that would like to host their own Zoom rooms. Okay, and how do we participate? So if you are looking to either have your brigade participate, or you are in a place that may not have a local brigade, but you want to participate and get other folks to participate, this is how you can do so. So there's really 3 easy steps. So attend the keynote event, attend the breakout rooms, and promote to those in your community. You can register using this link. Every brigade or group that attends will receive a National Day of Civic Hacking participation badge that you can add to your website. And then brigades groups that have 10 or more people that attend will receive t-shirts for their brigade members. So smaller brigades will get 10 t-shirts, larger brigades will get 20 t-shirts. Host a Zoom room. So after the keynote event and time for collective action, you can host your brigade's own Zoom room, and we will provide a Zoom room for you, for your brigade. And then designate a lead for each action. So strongly encourage you to have a lead from your group or your brigade for each of the 3 collective actions who can help organize folks from your brigade in each of the actions. And I think I saw a question pop up, so I'm going to stop sharing and look at our Q&A. Yes, so Greg Boyer asked, do you have any details on the COVID response problem statements? Can brigades focus and prepare ahead of time on one or more of those problem statements? Yes, the problem statements are in the 2020 National Day of Civic Hacking Toolkit, and we're going to go over that right now. And then Bonnie asked, is there going to be a list of local brigade Zooms and the projects they will be working on during the local Zoom time? For instance, we will likely run a call-a-thon to continue to validate food pantry entries as part of the Food Oasis LA site, perfect for non-coding contributors. That's awesome. So what we will do is we're going to link the Brigade meetup event on the National Day of Civic Hacking webpage, which is one of the reasons that we've been asking folks to create your meetup event. And hopefully in the next week and a half or so, we'll be able to get those individual links linked to the National Day of Civic Hacking website so folks can learn a little bit more about what each local brigade is doing for National Day of Civic Hacking. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh yeah, Jenna asked, the design audit, will we also be covering states that don't have a brigade? The answer is yes. So we're looking to cover all 50 states. We realize that there are some states that have multiple brigades. And so we will be using kind of that first hour of the collective action to divvy up by state and by service. And then since this is such a broad event, we anticipate a lot of folks participating who might not typically engage with a local brigade or might not have a brigade in their location. So we'll be able to open up to states that don't have a brigade. Okay, awesome. I'm going to turn things back over to Francesca and Eleanor to talk about the 3 specific actions that we'll be taking. So we'll probably cover that for the next 5 to 10 minutes and then leave any room for any last questions. Let me screen share again.
Great, thank you so much, Veronica. So we are super excited about the National Day actions. I'm personally really excited because I feel like all of the work that the network is able to do will really support Code for America staff in being able to work more efficiently, work better. So if you want to go to the next slide, Veronica. So the first is a design audit, also referred to as a tear down, but we're trying to keep a positive spin. So essentially one of the first steps that we've done at Code for America as staff is run through applications ourselves just to get a lay of the land and understand, what interface our clients currently seeing. One thing I want to call out it's explicit in the toolkit is that this isn't the same as user research, right? It's not the same as asking somebody about their experience going through the flow or watching them go through the flow, but it is a really good first step to just orient yourself to the process. A lot of times state agencies and county agencies in California are not even really interfacing with these systems at all because they're directly going into their backend systems. And so they really don't even necessarily have visibility into the client experience. So we think this is a really great project to be able to provide visibility into what clients are working with and also share insights with the whole network about opportunities for improvement. So there are very explicit directions in the toolkit. We also created a design audit template, which was created by one of our designers internally. Really excited to share that with you. It's really pretty. And it will basically guide you step by step on how to create the design audit. One thing I also want to call out is we're really curious to know how long this takes you. So the instructions will say this, but essentially, we'd love it if you're willing to go through it once, apply, make a note of who the household is, and don't actually submit it, but get through all the way to the very end and time it, and then go back and do your design audit and really call out As I believe it was maybe Renee that asked a question about, how things are phrased. Make note of the things that don't feel right to you. We also provided a list of design heuristics, so basically an agreed upon set of standards that will help you kind of to judge each page and really think through how it does or it doesn't match up with what the design expectations are or the client needs are. So again, really the idea here is to provide visibility into an experience that's typically unseen by administrators and be kind of a starting point for further advocacy on improving these systems and further client research. And feel free to type any questions in the Q&A box. So the next is an asset map. So one thing that we mentioned during our slide presentation a second ago is that the government systems that we're working with are a huge starting point, but they're not meeting everybody's needs right now. The need is pretty vast. And so we would love to support and work with brigades to have more access points for folks in your local communities. And one of the elements of this asset map was also to really think through what's happening in your community. So maybe examine a little bit about, what languages people speak in your communities, what age groups exist, what the poverty levels are, what the demographics are, and really think about how those resources square, the resources you find in your community square with the needs of the community to identify any gaps, and think about how you can leverage your work for community level advocacy. Again, there are more detailed instructions in the toolkit. I'll pass it over to Eleanor for the next one.
Yeah, so this third one is a bit more open-ended. The third action is to really develop new solutions to COVID response by exploring a few problem statements that we've developed based on sort of what we've seen at CFA over the past few months. We've offered 2 problem statements to you all. One of them is about reimagining your state's PEBT response. So as I just went over in great detail, PEBT is such an important program that's meeting a really urgent need for families. But it was really hard for many states to implement and had a lot of challenges, and every state was sort of different in sort of how they approached and rolled out the program. So, we think there's a great opportunity here for brigades to evaluate, how did your state's PEBT program go? Where did your state encounter challenges? And even broadly, sort of taking this creative problem solving lens, if you were to sort of scrub your state's plan and start over, what might a PEBT 2.0 service prototype look like? So if you were to sort of reimagine, how do you reach families impacted by school closures? How do you replace that school meal benefit for families that really need it? How might you imagine this program looking? The other one is really about designing new benefits delivery systems, knowing that, as Francesca mentioned and talked about as we saw in our Get Cal Fresh data, so many state systems really felt the pressure of unprecedented spikes in volume, and the impact on a lot of these systems was hard. We saw a lot of systems buckling, we saw delays, we saw decreased capacity. And so really thinking about, how did your state's benefit system stand up? Did you see an increased spike in the state? Were there long delays or wait times? Where were the pain points or the pressure points felt in the system with this increased need? And how might we use digital tools and the skills that we have as technologists and advocates to prepare to handle increased volume in the future? Unfortunately, recognizing that this might not be the only moment in these systems' lifetimes when we have a moment of really increased need, and how can we look back and understand and see what happened and try and correct that for the future? I think this one is really exciting to me right now because, all of them are exciting, but this one in particular, I think that we're really seeing that things are still really moving at breakneck speed. Many states and many state agencies, community-based organizations are continuing to operate in crisis response mode. And they don't necessarily have the resources or the capacity right now to be sort of looking behind them, with hindsight and consolidating their lessons learned from the past few months and thinking creatively about how they could change operations or reimagine delivery in the future. And I think that there's a real value add that external folks like us can have to help do that, to support that thinking a little bit and to offer different solutions. I think that there's a real need for creative thinking, new creative service design prototyping, and just generating new innovative solutions for how we might serve people more effectively in a crisis.
Awesome. So that was great. Thank you both. And we have a few minutes where we can take questions. Let's see. So someone asked, how will the design audits be used by CFA? So this is a really exciting aspect of this year's National Day of Civic Hacking. So as we briefly mentioned, there is a 50-state assessment that Code for America has put out about a year and a half ago that showed a lot of these screens from different benefits applications. And so we'll essentially be adding on design audits from National Day of Civic Hacking to the 50-state assessment. So it'll essentially be another data point that's used by government agencies. So one huge benefit of creating that 50-state assessment is that state agencies were able to go in and see kind of how their state's benefits applications compared to other states' benefits applications, and how folks that worked at Code for America who are experts in these systems were able to evaluate those systems. And so this adds an extra layer of essentially user research and user testing through a lens of folks that are looking to go in and kind of evaluate these systems, but as normal people and not necessarily as staff members. So really excited to be able to add this to the 50-state assessment.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we had a contractor support one of our staff people who did that project. It was a huge lift to the 50 states assessment, many hours of work. And so we're really excited to be able to have insight from across the country, from your brigades, to go through the application and let us know if anything's changed, provide more insight. Simply because it would just take a tremendous amount of staff time that we would not be able to do. So it will be really helpful in terms of influencing our next steps and how we're able to evaluate opportunities.
Cool. Renee says, more a note and less a question when talking about poverty statistics in the context of the safety net. Brigade should make sure they note what sources they use are referencing, read the official poverty measure, supplemental poverty measure, etc. Means tested programs use only the official poverty measure. Great, thank you for that, Renee. And then Nick Flourish asked, can you provide an example output of a design audit so those with less experience would have an idea of what an individual audit session result might look like? Not something as polished as the stuff in the 50-state assessment, but if one of you sat down and audited an application, what would the notes, results, etc. look like? I believe that there's a link to an audit that was done by 2 members of the safety net team, which is not as which it does look pretty because one of those people was a designer, and I believe it was Jasmine who also created the template for the design audit for National Day of Civic Hacking. So while it does look pretty, it is more of an individual kind of effort to go through benefits application and is linked in the toolkit. And I don't know if that's the full extent of what we have.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go for it, Francesca. And we're probably going to say the same thing.
Yeah. So Jasmine did a really good job of kind of like providing step-by-step instructions within the template. So it's not really just a template, it's also kind of a set of instructions to help you go through the process. And there is a link also to a design audit that I did with one of our coworkers of Your Benefits Now, which is the application tool in Los Angeles County. So that can give you a sense. And when I started doing it, I didn't know what a design audit was. So so it really is pretty raw, but we went page by page and went through it. So you should have a lot of instructions, and I believe we'll also be around the day to answer questions that come up. But that design audit is linked in the toolkit.
Yeah, and if you have never done a design audit before, you are not alone. Many people have never done them. And so I think it was designed to really make it easy, step by step, and really have it be also consistent so that, at the end, we can have sort of all of these design audits that kind of use similar ideas to assess, and that we can really sort of compare and contrast. So we're really excited to see what people come up with.
Great, we're coming up on time. Does anybody have any more questions? Can wait another minute or so. Thank you, Renee. And thank you everybody for joining. This has been really fun to learn a lot more from Eleanor and Francesca. Thank you so much for your time and all of the work that you have put into planning National Day of Civic Hacking this year. I want to make sure to give a big shout out to the National Day of Civic Hacking Committee, who has put in a ton of time and thoughtful effort to be able to plan for a great event this year. I want to plug again that if you are joining us from a brigade, please make sure that your brigade has a meetup event for National Day of Civic Hacking. There's a sample of this in the toolkit. Make sure that your meetup event links people to register for National Day of Civic Hacking and also includes any information about your brigade's local event. Like we said, you do not have to have your own brigade's local event in order to participate in National Day of Civic Hacking. So you can funnel folks to kind of the national efforts so that you don't have to incur any extra burden at this time, and folks can still participate and be a part of the day. So we will be following up with folks to ask to make sure that you have your meetup set up. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or a member of the National Day of Civic Hacking Committee directly, or a member of the National Advisory Council who has also been helping to plan this day. We will make a recording available. We will make the slide deck available, and I'll add a couple extra links to helpful resources for National Day of Civic Hacking. So thank you again, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks,
Veronica.
Bye.